Hey, what's going on, guys? It's a beautiful night. I'm actually out here targeting crappies and walleyes tonight, but I wanted to address how to retrieve a paddle tail swim bait. I'm using paddle tails for everything tonight, including the crappies and the walleyes. Been catching bass on them, been catching pike on them, and a question I get a lot is how do you retrieve a paddle tail swim bait properly? Well, I can answer that question, but it's going to take a few minutes because there's a few different retrieves that I typically use with swim baits depending on their size and how they're built and what I'm fishing for. First things first, there is a few things you need to know about swim baits. They basically are designed to kick, so when the water flows over them, that tail kicks, and that's the key to the whole system, is having that tail kick. One thing you can do, retrieve number one, is basically cast that swim bait out. I'm gonna watch my rod tip. It's gonna probably thump a little bit. You'll kind of feel the vibration. Wait till it stops thumping and hits bottom. Sometimes a fish will hit it right there. But then basically, I'm just gonna slow roll that swim bait back to me. And it will catch fish because that paddle tail's kicking. And it's a great method for a pike and really, really good for walleyes when they're shallow. And you don't need to impart any more action than just basically casting it out, letting it sink, and then turning that rod handle, and you'll feel that paddle tail kicking in the rod, thump, 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 and all of a sudden a fish will just smack it. And when they hit these swim baits on a straight retrieve, they hit them hard. The key to the whole thing is actually the weight of the jig head. So you want to make sure that the weight of your jig head is just enough to keep that bait from sinking to the bottom and getting in the weeds, but also you want it down towards the top of the weeds. So right now I'm using like a 1/2 ounce jig on this paddle tail. This is probably a 4-inch, 5-inch paddle tail. And I'm fishing like 12 feet of water, and that seems to be about right. If I kind of follow the edge of those weeds, it keeps it about 8 feet down. If you want to fish really shallow, go lighter on the weight. If you want to fish really deep, go heavier on the weight. For as far as what kind of swim baits I use when I'm using this method, a lot of times I like the fatter bodied swim baits. Like this is a hollow belly. Another one I use quite a bit for this would be kind of like the ribbed style cylindrical body swim bait. That's another good one for casting and retrieving. And that's typically the ones I'm going to use for this application. Now the second retrieve I'm going to use with the same ribbed swim bait, and oftentimes with a smaller, thinner tailed swim bait, is a jigging retrieve. So I'm going to cast it out, let it fall to bottom, sort of like I did when I swam that one back, but this time I'm gonna hop and let it fall on a tight line. Hop, let it fall on a tight line. Very similar to jigging with a jig and a minnow, but instead of letting it drop straight down, I wanna kind of leave that line tight so it swims forward and hits the bottom. And they'll often smash it on that drop with the tail swimming forward. Now that retrieve works really, really well when fish are more aggressive and I'm fishing more out of cover where there's not weeds directly on the bottom and I'm not going to get hung up. Now the third retrieve, I can also use this same swim bait. It works great for this retrieve. I'm going to cast it out, again let it sink to bottom, and it's kind of a combination of the swimming and the jig retrieve. So I'm going to swim it a little ways, like maybe 10 feet, and then I'm actually going to let it drop back to bottom again. Boom. On a tight line. Swim it a little ways, let it drop back to bottom again. Boom. And that is one of my favorite retrieves for walleyes on the edges of weed lines, and then also in the springtime when they're up shallow. It's just like they follow it for a little ways and then they see it drop and they just smoke it. But again, you want to leave that line tight as it falls to let that tail swim, and that works really, really well. Now, one other retrieve number 4, which I actually like to use a more thin-bodied, thin-tailed bait for, is to cast it out. Again, let it sink to bottom. And the reason you want a thin-tailed one for this and a thin-bodied one, oh, there's a fish, is because you want this bait to actually fall to bottom on a slack line, unlike the other way where we're kind of keeping that tight line. Little bassarino there, hit it on the fall. We're gonna actually cast it out again here. So we're gonna let it sink to bottom and we're gonna rip it. So I'm gonna actually pop that bait and then let it fall straight to bottom. Pop that bait, let it fall straight to bottom. And this is a really deadly method for triggering fish, especially walleyes, to hit that bait. And it's a much more aggressive method of jigging, but it does work when they're not quite as turned on. And it's an excellent method for catching walleyes in those conditions. Oh, there's one. There's a little better crappie. So the fifth way is actually vertical jigging, which I'm doing right now. There's a school of crappies kind of hanging under my boat right now. And basically all I'm doing is just letting it free fall at the bottom. I use this for lake trout, I use it for crappies, I use it for walleyes. And you just want to let that bait fall straight down the bottom and let the tail kick all the way down. And if you don't get a hit, just swim it straight back up again. You don't need to twitch it much, you don't need to do a whole lot. You're just letting it drop and then lifting slowly and letting the tail do the work. And it's a very effective method for vertical jigging. So it's not technically a retrieve, but it definitely shouldn't be left out because it is very effective. Well, that's pretty much it for swim baits, guys. That's how I retrieve a swim bait. And I got some more crappies to catch before the sun goes down here. So we'll catch you later. Get hooked up.